Rosalía or Rosalía is a Spanish flamenco nueva singer who broke out onto the scene last year with her Los Angeles album, which I listened to a good number of times. Thought it was nice, thought it was very warm on the ears for the most part. Just melodically, I wasn't all that gripped by the music, I must say. She demonstrated that she had a very unique style from the get-go, had a wonderful voice just to listen to. It worked perfectly for like background listens and that kind of thing. And as much as I'm pretty, I don't know, I guess I'm not well versed in that kind of style of music, any sort of Spanish, flamenco type stuff, Latino, reggaeton, that kind of genre, I think is something I've got a bit of a gap with. So I can't really say I know a great deal about this genre going into it. So perhaps some of my, review may come across as a bit amateur. So I do apologize right now, just in case I do seem like I'm not entirely sure what it is that I'm talking about. But hopefully it turns out pretty good. Probably not the best way to sell a review right at the start by saying, hey guys, I don't know shit about what I'm talking about here, but I think it's important for a viewer to know that the reviewer isn't exactly fully equipped. But anyway, El Malquiera is a follow-up album to Los Angeles, which from the singles shown that she was going for a bit more of a upbeat, catchy type of sound instead of the more somber, dark tones that was on her debut. Malamente, Mi Nombre especially were the tracks that just showed that she had this real great knack for a good catchy pop song. And to be honest, I would say these two tracks are in fact the easiest highlights on this whole album for me, because I just love the flamenco hand claps that are thrown in throughout the tracks on these ones, because they're just so immediately danceable, they're so immediately infectious without using all that much. Like when you essentially just strip these tracks down to the ingredients, there's actually not a lot being thrown in. Like there's really just her voice, there may be a couple of instruments, and then these hand claps that are providing the beat and the percussion. And yet somehow, they end up being fantastic. You would expect that tracks like this need a little bit more to them, perhaps, anything else to take over the tracks to add a bit more meat to the bones, but it's really not that essential. Perhaps it is for some people that want a bit more of a rhythm, bit more bass, perhaps a bit more of a groove, but honestly she can carry these tracks really well by using very little. And that's where you come into the other outside influences of her music, because perhaps she has been under a bit of fire for using gypsy culture, as people have attacked her for appropriating that culture and using other elements that aren't necessarily classic Spanish music in her own music. And it's actually kind of interesting because throughout this album you do kind of pick up a few other elements of music. For example, I feel as though there's a little bit of an Arab influence on this music. I'm not entirely sure where, but I think in the vocals at times, the way she's singing, you don't always get the classic Spanish sounds on this album. It certainly feels like you're listening to otherworldly music being kind of thrown in this Spanish world. And honestly, I think it ends up hindering this album at points, because I think when she goes full Spanish flamenco Nueva, she is hitting us with some of her best tracks ever, but then by the end of the album we're just getting these really bare bone ballads where you're just hearing her voice, and her voice is wonderful to listen to, it's really beautiful, but I can't really say I'm all that gripped by the music. I think she creates something quite interesting on the track Baghdad, where she interpolates Cry Me a River by Justin Timberlake. That's kind of an interesting inspiration being thrown in onto this album, because she has stated that she grew up with Western music as well, so she wanted to incorporate that in her own music, as that has influenced her life, and it certainly makes for a really interesting track. It at least adds a bit of a nuance for me, whereas the final two tracks just really don't add anything for me, honestly. They're screaming out for some melody somewhere in the mix, like just something. But on the tracks where she gets it right, where they are full on catchy as hell tracks, I think are the best moments. She has these really interesting vocal inflections on some of the choruses. She can make a hook out of anything, actually. It's quite strange and interesting to listen to the way she does that with her voice. Track 4 I think is the best example, where she's like she's just throwing in these random as fuck, just vocal, like little snippets every so often. It's like, you know, on the track from Julie Holter's latest album, where she's just doing these like really experimental vocal passages. And that is the experimental approach that I think Rosalía has, that perhaps other musicians in her realm doesn't quite go for, which I think certainly separates her from the rest of the crowd, which I can definitely appreciate. I think there's a great use of guitar on the second track as well, and the, you know, once again, those little hand claps providing the melody, the percussion, perhaps at times could use with something else stronger carrying the tracks, but for what they are, I think they really work, especially like that little track run of 1, 2, and 3. It certainly is a great little run of tracks, especially on the third track, where she utilizes her vocals again to provide a great chorus, and she just belts out these really wonderful vocals. And I don't know, I just think it provides a really nice listen for the most part. But those highlights, I think, should have carried the entire album, in my opinion. I just think these slower, somber tracks just drag it down. There's not really anything that's added to them. There's not really much weight, even in terms of emotional weight. I'm not really feeling it, you know? I'm just kind of waiting for something to happen. I just think going into the album, listening to tracks like Malamente and Mi Nombre is just such a high point to enter an album. Like, there's some of the best tracks I think I've heard all year, especially Mi Nombre, and then the album gets dragged down a little bit by not having the tracks live up to those ones. But I think for the most part, people are going to like this. I think people will certainly be intrigued by her style and the influences thrown into her music, because again, as I said, there is definitely more than just Spanish culture being incorporated into her music. I think you can pick up other elements from other parts of the world listening to this album. The tracks that do hit really hard, so I think overall this is a pretty damn good album. I'm gonna go 7 out of 10. Make sure you give this a listen, check it out, subscribe to the channel for more reviews. Have a good day. Let me know your thoughts on this album too if you have already heard it. Wow.